In the Taisho era of Tokyo, Japan, one name strikes fear in the hearts of any demon looking to get up to some trouble: Raidou Kuzunoha, the original detective prince. This character became legendary within the wider Shin Megami Tensei franchise and is also a fan favorite. However, for years now, the games he originated from have been stuck on outdated hardware, and physical copies of those old games have skyrocketed due to their rarity. I mean, look at this. You could either buy Raidou 2 or put a down payment on a Vancouver apartment. Because of this, not many people have gotten the opportunity to play through these classic games. To them, Raidou Kuzunoha was this elusive name that they would hear about from time to time, along with the occasional cameo or reference. However, just a few months ago, it was announced that the first Raidou game was getting a modernized remaster for current platforms. Those who know me might remember that I don't exactly have the nicest things to say about Atlus's previous remasters. I thought games like Nocturne HD and the modern Persona 3 portable port were underwhelming, whether that be because of visuals, audio, or performance issues. From the get-go, Raidou Remaster looked to be very different from those games, to the point where I'm honestly shocked that it's considered to be lumped into the same group. While I was excited to get my hands on this game myself, part of me was a little worried about its quality. I was excited for Nocturne HD, and I was pretty let down by what was delivered, and those experiences, whether you like it or not, do stick with you. My biggest fear was that this remaster was going to give people the wrong impression of Raidou. This is a remaster of a niche game from the mid-2000s. Whether we like it or not, this will be a lot of people's first time experiences with the game and world. I'm harsh on these remasters and remakes because I want that first time experience to be the best it can be. What got me interested in Raidou Remastered was that it was more than just some simple graphical update, and maybe one or two nice changes. It looked to be a legitimate second pass at the game, something that Raidou 1 definitely needed. So is Raidou Remastered successful at what it sets out to accomplish? Only one way to find out, right? While the game comes out on June 19th, Sega and Atlus were kind enough to send me a review code of this game about a week in advance. I want to lay out those biases right now because, yeah, that is a form of special treatment. I don't let that sort of influence color my opinion, believe me. However, I do want to mention it because some people believe that it can influence others' thoughts. So if you're still unsure about Raidou Remastered, even after watching this video, then I encourage you to check out other reviews and see if it's right for you. Games are expensive after all, and the last thing people want is to drop a bunch of money on something they don't enjoy, right? I want to mention that this is going to be a spoiler-free review, with footage taken from the first 5 chapters of the game. Also, just as a heads up, all the footage you're going to be seeing is from the Nintendo Switch 2 version of the game. Usually I don't do this, but I figured that because a lot of Atlus fans play games on that platform, that I would at least represent it for them. Also, it's nice to just play this game in my bed before going to sleep. The story of Raidou Remastered is the same one as the original game. You play as a high school student who, after passing an initiation exam, becomes the next in line to take up the name of Raidou Kuzunoha. Yeah, the kid's name isn't really Raidou. It's more like a title that's passed down from generation to generation. The Kuzunoha are a clan of detectives that use demons as tools to help maintain peace all around the world, with our new Raidou here being the protector of Tokyo. With the help of his companion/mentor Goto, Raidou joins a local detective agency run by this charismatic fellow named Narumi. It doesn't take too long for the group to find themselves getting wrapped up in a mystery surrounding a missing girl, these mysterious red-clad soldiers, and a sinister plot that's brewing just underneath our noses. Raidou 1's story is pretty good. Again, this is a spoiler-free review, but I will say that those who are looking for a compelling story with twists and turns with good characters are going to be in for a treat. If you think you know what's going on, there's a high chance you really don't. But not in an obnoxious way where sudden shifts kill whatever emotions you're feeling. The characters might not have the most depth in the world, but they work well for the story that they're in, and the new voice acting added to this version helps sell their personalities. If you've played Raidou 1 before this, then the voice acting will help make the experience feel fresh. I really like Ray Chase as Goto. I think his voice fits the character very well. It's like having a little Prince Noctis following around, ain't he cute? However, if you're looking to jump back into Raidou 1, then what's going to grab your attention is the drastic change in gameplay. Alright, despite my appreciation for older games and their design, I'll be the first one to admit that Raidou 1 does not hold up very well. Shit, I struggle to even say that it was amazing when it first came out. I'm not talking about the detective stuff, that was a cool part about the game, I mean the combat. The combat of Raidou 1 is shallow, borderline prototype in how simple it is. Raidou only has one combo, a stinger move with a ton of end lag, and a spin attack. The rest of your kit comes from whatever demon you have out on the field. Hell, there's not even a dodge button, believe it or not. I appreciate what the game is trying to accomplish here. You know, demonstrate the cooperation between Raidou and his demons in a real-time setting. But the execution is bare. The novelty runs out too quickly, and for a 20+ hour game, it is the barrier that most people struggle with when trying to get into Raidou. It's safe to assume that Atlus was going to borrow elements from Raidou 2 for this remaster, as that game is a fully realized version of the original despite how different they end up playing. And yeah, the combat of Raidou Remastered is pretty similar to Raidou 2. If you've played that game before, then the basics that you remember are here and accounted for. You primarily take control of Raidou and fight alongside two demon companions. What sets Raidou apart from other Megami Tensei games is the hack-and-slash combat. Exploiting weaknesses doesn't grant extra moves, rather it stuns enemies. Skills that used to hit all enemies on the field are now area-based. If you want demons to use their skills, then you need to make sure you have enough magnetite in your reserve. This stuff can drain very quickly, especially if you want your demons to have buff skills. What I like about this game's magnetite system is that it encourages the use of all of your tools. Your basic sword attacks don't deal a lot of damage, but they're quick and help you generate mag quickly. Your heavy attacks are slower, but are Raidou's real damage dealers. But the trade-off though is that these attacks don't steal mag from enemies. Just like Raidou 2, the key to victory is finding that balance between stealing mag and dealing damage. Weakness exploits will be your best friends because of this, since you get more mag and deal more damage when the enemy is stunned. Raidou's combat is an interesting take on classic Mega 10 systems. If you've never played this sort of game before, then there is an adjustment period. However, once you find that groove and the playstyle that works best for you, then you're gonna be in for a great time. The combat is fast and frantic. There's a lot to manage at once. I personally played the game on Truth Seeker mode, which is the hardest difficulty available, and it wasn't a pushover. While random encounters were comfortable, I can name a handful of bosses and side content that did take me a good few tries to really nail, and it felt super satisfying doing it. If Raidou Remaster ended up stopping at just backporting the second game's systems, then I'm sure a lot of people would be happy. But the team ended up adding a few extra additions and design changes to help smooth out the gameplay experience and add a little more depth. Weapons in this game, more than ever, feel like a skill tree. Whenever you craft a weapon, whatever skill it comes with will be permanently added to Raidou's repertoire. There are two types of skills. There's the active abilities that you trigger manually during combat, and then there's the passive skills. Passives are pretty self-explanatory. They're skills you equip to Raidou to help give yourself an edge in battle. The ones I was more interested in playing around with were the active skills. You can have 3 of these equipped at once, and they vary in terms of utility. There's a skill that cures ailments and grants a buff, skills that temporarily shield the party from elemental damage, or even ones that just act as extra attacks. With both sword skills and summoner skills, you're able to customize Raidou how you see fit. Maybe I want my Raidou to have a lot of elemental coverage. How about a Raidou that can dish out some damage but also be a good support unit without having to burn items? What's nice is that you're able to swap out your skills at any time, including during combat. Enter a random encounter and your skill selection might not be the best they can be, just change them around a bit and there you go. Something that I'm not the biggest fan of usually is the use of cooldown timers in games. Most of the time, I find them to be more intrusive than strategic. Raidou does suffer from this to an extent, but it's thankfully not as bad as some of the other games I've played. Most summoner skills in Raidou have rather short cooldown timers, and they're usually balanced around the pure utility of the skill. Something like Raidou's Exorcism Bullet is only a 10-second cooldown because it's just a straight shot of damage. It's useful for when you would rather use basic sword attacks on stunned enemies to get mag back, since you can at least squeeze in some damage. The more overpowered skills tend to come with longer cooldowns. You can shorten these with a late game passive skill if you plan on being a more offensive player. I'm not sure how much of a reduction it gives since I never got it in my playthrough. I was more so focused on spear type weapons since I like the way the heavy attacks handle, and the skills that branch offers tend to be more my jam. While I'm not the biggest fan of cooldown timers, I found that, for the skills I liked using anyway, they weren't the worst thing in the world. I still think that having a more active approach when it comes to charging dodging them would have been preferred. Maybe Raidou could have used some of his own mag to do it, or make it so that every sword strike you land fills it up just a tiny bit until it's ready to be unleashed. There is another mechanic that uses that though, so I guess they didn't want to tie too many actions to that. Gotta have variety, right? Speaking of which, there are two more combat mechanics that I haven't talked about yet. There's the Devil's Bane and Spirit Sword. The former is a counterattack of sorts. By landing enough hits to knock an enemy off balance, you can use the Devil's Bane technique to deal a good chunk of damage to the enemy while also stealing a lot of mag. The alternative way of triggering this is by perfect dodging. Now this is different from the dodge that's already in the game, and I feel as though they didn't do an amazing job at specifying what they mean by this. There's this dodge technique that's already here where if you dodge an enemy when it's about to attack you, Raidou does this slick maneuver where he zips around the enemy. This is totally fine and is very useful on its own, but it isn't the perfect dodge that the game is talking about. What they mean is perfect dodge in a literal sense. You know you got it when the command for Devil's Bane pops up and the game slows down, but I feel as though the conveyance on the timing of this technique isn't all there just yet. There's not enough feedback when dodging to properly figure out the timing, I feel. For me, Devil's Bane feels like a reward for constant pressure, but with an optional trigger out of a dodge. It's a small thing, but it would have benefited the user experience greatly if this distinction was made more obvious. Devil's Bane on its own is a fun skill to pull off, and it's constantly useful. A skill I'm not too hot on is the Spirit Sword. As per Atlus tradition, it's a flashy attack that nukes the whole screen basically. It does a lot of damage, it can instantly wipe out most random encounters on hard mode. However, where I find that this skill stands out from the other attempts at super moves is in its method of charging and how its properties actually change. This is what I was referring to earlier when I wanted skills to charge based on player inputs. The Spirit Sword gains energy as you land hits on enemies. However, the higher your combo count is, the more energy you gain per attack. This is pretty good as it encourages constant pressure on the player's end and has a tangible reward for being able to stay on the offensive. For most of the game, I found the charge time for this skill to be rather reasonable for how strong it was. Like, it can take a while before this thing is ready to be fired off. You could go through entire bosses without getting the chance to use this thing once, and I thought that worked as a balancing measure. But by the end of the game, I found the charge time to be a little too quick because of certain upgrades you can unlock by doing optional stuff. The reason why this is an issue is because the Spirit Sword changes its element based on whatever you're fighting. This means that you can essentially always exploit a weakness when given the chance to, and for random encounters, that's more than enough to kill them. They're a little bit more balanced in the context of bosses, since I was never able to outright kill any of them in one hit with this thing, but it still knocks off a large chunk of health whenever it's used. It feels a little bit like cheating in a way. It's not like Theurgies or Showtimes where using one just basically makes you win, but it's also arguably a little too useful as a crutch tool. Thankfully, some of the more challenging bosses still gave me trouble even with the use of the Spirit Sword, but I have a feeling that when I replay the game with more knowledge of attack patterns and junk, that it'll become a little too strong. I get that I don't have to use it, but it always gets tempting whenever the opportunity presents itself. It's one of the new features added to the game, so I want to use it, right? I think a good compromise would be to keep it strong against random encounters, but have it be less effective against bosses. I'm just worried that some players won't be able to fully appreciate the enemy design because of attacks like these. When it comes to the combat of Raidou Remastered, it's very different compared to the original game, but it still feels like Raidou. This isn't a case where they took something that had a unique flavor of its own and changed it into being something far less unique and worse. This is the game that we're talking about here. It's not like there wasn't any room for improvement or anything. Is the combat that we have now flawless? No, there are issues. Some that I'd probably want to save if I decide to make a full video covering the original Raidou one. But what we have now is good. I don't think it's a hot take to say that the combat in Raidou Remastered is better in basically every way. Honestly, the combat overhaul is where a lot of the real meat of the changes lie, because the stuff outside of that was basically untouched. The detective aspect of Raidou was already the best part of the original game, so no real changes were needed to be made outside of the standard ones you'd expect. A lot of quality of life stuff is here, like being able to fast travel anytime outside of the Dark Realm, manual skill inheritance, and the game automatically swapping your demons for context-sensitive actions. This one's a godsend and saves so much time on unnecessary menu navigation. There's also an attempt at side quests in this version of the game. I say attempt because a lot of them just aren't very good. There's a lot of go here and use interaction / find object quests. Maybe there's one or two that are a little bit more involved, but I found the vast majority of them to be rather dull. It's not like bad content, it's harmless and quick enough that it doesn't make the game worse for being there, but it isn't good enough for me to be all that excited whenever I unlock more. It's funny that the best ones in the game just so happen to be the ones from the original. At least now it's easier to find them. Same with main progression too. A minimap and objective markers were added, and it makes knowing where to go a lot easier. On one hand, it was kinda cool when you had to deduce where to go and who to talk to based on context clues. It made the detective stuff feel a lot more immersive, but on the other hand, it's honestly very easy to get lost in the old game without realizing it. They sort of expect you to remember the names of every major location by heart, and I'm pretty bad at that. So I don't mind this as a way to get things moving along, but an option to turn it off would be nice. I want to acknowledge that, as much as I enjoy this remaster, there will probably be a portion of players who aren't the biggest fan of certain changes. I can see that happening with the game's visual style. The original Raidou used pre-rendered backgrounds, and I feel as though that was a decision made to save on performance. It's no coincidence that the Raidou games were the only PS2 Atlus titles to run at 60 frames per second. However, even if that was a technical limitation, the game's art direction was clearly influenced by this decision. Raidou has a much more realistic art style when it comes to the lighting and demon designs. In the remaster, things look a lot closer to what you would expect out of modern Mega 10 games, and I can imagine that rubbing some people the wrong way. I do think the updated art style does fit Raidou because the game now looks a lot closer to the CG movies, so the transition isn't as jarring. I do think that the game is a tad too bright though. I mean, for the town areas it should look like this because this is your safe zone after all. It's supposed to be welcoming. It's just that I found that the PS2 game looked better in the darker areas. It's a weird dilemma because I like the way both games look, but for different reasons. I will say though, I appreciate the remaster for doing its best job to recreate the environments in full 3D while keeping similar camera angles. It really goes to show that the team cared about the presentation of that old game, and they tried their best to replicate it as accurately as possible. I wouldn't be surprised if Atlus just doesn't have those original pre-rendered backgrounds anymore, especially ones that would work in a widescreen format. It's a pretty tough decision to make, and for what it's worth, I actually stopped noticing after a few minutes. Like, it's a bit jarring to be able to control the camera in some areas, but when we switch back to the fixed cameras, the game's aesthetics are good and faithful to the original in a lot of ways. It just goes to show how much effort went into this remaster compared to the other ones we've gotten lately. It feels like Atlus saw the mixed reception of Nocturne HD and took that feedback to heart. That game was basically the same, but with lighting that failed to recapture the tone of the original. Raidou, on the other hand, goes out of its way to add updates and fix problems that the classic game had, and it makes it a much better experience as a result. It's not like they got rid of anything to accomplish it either. It's still Raidou 1 at its core. The changes were additive. There was also a few new ideas thrown in here for the sake of experimenting, and I can imagine that with some refinement and a bigger budget, we could get an amazing third entry. I'm just happy to see that Atlus really gave it their all when it came to bringing back this classic character. Raidou was never the most popular thing in the world, coming and going just before Atlus really broke into the mainstream. So I hope that this second attempt is met with a lot more fanfare. I really do recommend this game, especially to someone who found the original Raidou's combat to be a little too bare for their liking. While I would like to see a remaster of the second game as well, I hope that doesn't end up being the only things done with this character. I'm not sure if or when it'll ever happen, but if there's another case to solve, I know I'll be there to check it out. But until then, I'm just happy to see that Raidou Kuzunoha is back.